We do that through workshops, summits, conferences, and we have collaborative partnerships with other conferences and work with researchers to publish publications. And also we have an awards program that recognizes thought leadership of our members. We have a lot of active members from industry as well as universities across the world. And the names of some of these companies that you see is a sample list. And if you want to learn more about ISSIP, go to ISSIP.org, and there's a lot more information there. This is the first workshop in a series of 4 workshops. And the goal is really to foster a dialogue between industry and academia about finding and developing collaborative ways that can close the gap between education and STEM employment, given that most of the jobs in the future, most of the high-paying jobs in the future will be in the STEM fields. And our work is focused in the context of future of work, future of undergraduate STEM education, and the new skills that are required in general, but also influenced by the pandemic. So this is the first in the series. The other 2 are held in on November 17th and December 8th and December 15th. And I encourage you to join us and sign up. You can go to ISSIP.org and under events and news, and you'll see the NSF workshops. I want to give some shout outs first and foremost to our main sponsor, the National Science Foundation, who's been supporting us over the last 3 years actually on this important effort. And also our other sponsors, Cisco Systems, for really helping us with a lot of back-end and organization. And so thanks to these sponsors. I'd also like to give a shout out to my collaborators, the other co-PIs and collaborators that have worked with me. Without their efforts, this wouldn't have been possible. So Dr. Howard Zimmerman from University of Washington, Dr. Lou Flung from San Jose State University, Dr. Martha Russell from Stanford, and Dr. Joe Ewan from ISSIP. I also would like to thank the programming committee and other co-chairs. I'm not going to go through all the lists. They're all ISSIP members and very active in our community. Next, I'd like to thank our distinguished speakers, Alex Kass from Accenture, Michelle Gull from Cisco, Dr. Alexander Medina Borja from NSF, Rick Rafey from InOrbit, Nate Timon from Red Hat, Dr. Martha Russell from Stanford, and Heather Yorka from MasterCard. We're really looking forward to hearing your perspectives and learning from you. We have a full agenda today. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but the first part you'll hear some context from me, and then Dr. Medina Borja on NSF context and supporting this work, and then we'll jump into the panel, and panel speakers will be introduced by Dr. Martha Russell. And then we'll go into a 10-minute break. We'll regroup. We'll cover interim survey results that's part of this project that reflects industry perspective on critical skills for the future. And this is an interim result. And then we get into breakout sessions to work on a question that we have developed, and then we'll wrap up and adjourn the meeting. So next slide. So a bit of context on the work that we've been involved in with the NSF support since 2019. In 2019, we were given an award to gain an industry perspective on STEM education for the future. And it was very similar to what we're doing here with the sort of workshops and surveys and interviews. And that work culminated in a paper that was published. It culminated in an NSF report, but a paper, peer-reviewed paper that was published as part of the proceedings of International Conference on Applied Human Factors and Ergonomics. And it was titled A Proposed Roadmap to Close the Gap Between Undergraduate Education and STEM Employment Across Industry Sectors. And as part of that work, next slide, we developed a framework that really we learned from our industry collaborators. And this framework is for really critical skills, but also not just limited to skills, but the kind of mindsets that are required for the future. And also another component that was really a wrapper around all of those was we need to make sure that all the voices are heard and everyone is represented in this opportunity for future of work in the future. We'll get into this, further down the workshop. But the skills. One thing that we did, everyone really sees a lot of reports on specialized skills and soft skills. And what we did, we actually separated soft skills from work practice skills and called them foundational skills. Next slide, please. So the present work builds on this finding. And as part of that past work, we were really faced with several questions. First of all, our work had to stop because COVID hit. And, 2 years and a pandemic later, now we are going back to say, how did the COVID crisis really change the perspective of industry and the impact on this framework? And then the other questions were, how are industry recruiters screening for STEM graduates? And what is the perspective of industry on best practices and by colleges and universities that align curricula and pedagogies with industry demand? And then looking at the evolution of credentialing and learning how industry actually views the evolution of credentialing. And those are the focus of our 4 workshops. And then our research also is going to look at can a set of desirable pedagogies, attributes be developed from these findings to inform higher education. So with that, this is some background and context. I'll now turn it over to Dr. Medina Borja to give an NSF context on this work. So Alex, please take it from here.
Okay, thank you, Yessi, and good morning, good afternoon, good night. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Yes,
okay,
we sure can.
So let me share my
Yes.
screen. Okay. Okay, I assume that you see my presentation.
Yep, we sure can,
Yes.
and it's in presentation mode now.
Looking good.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Okay, so thank you for having me here. And I decided that the best thing that I could do today to start this series of workshops was to talk about this report, the STEM Education for the Future report, that was charged to a subcommittee of what we call an advisory committee for each one of the directorates of NSF. This one was the advisory committee of the Education and Human Resources Directorate. And this charge was given to this subcommittee for the STEM Education for the Future in 2018, prior to the pandemic. And so I will relate a little bit of how the subcommittee came to some conclusions. I had the honor of being the executive secretary for this subcommittee. And the report, which is that you are seeing there, was released in 2020 in the spring, in the middle of the pandemic. If I can say, my opinion is that if there is a silver lining, if such a thing could be, for the pandemic for STEM education, is that this report, or the findings, or the advice, or the vision of this report became suddenly very realistic. Had the report been released probably a year before, a lot of people would have said that it was unrealistic, thinking about online education, for example, or hybrid education, and things like that, that today are really not only realistic, but it's the day-to-day of a majority of students across the nation. Why is that in 2018 this charge was given to the subcommittee? And this is not news to anybody. It's really that, you know, we have so many changes in technology first that are, really fostering changes in the nature of work, in the need for new workforce skills. There is also parallel changes in the national demographics, people who are going to be in the classrooms in the future. And of course, with all the technological developments, we also have changes in the nature of STEM content. And so what is that we teach? I'm not going to read the names again, but this subcommittee was chaired by Dr. Margaret Honey, who is the president and CEO of the New York Hall of Science, and several other very distinguished members. So the subcommittee was given some guiding questions. And remember, this is pre-pandemic time, right? And basically, the first one, of course, is how can we make the institutions of higher education implement necessary change? We know it's really, really hard. The pandemic helped, but in general, making the university change is very, very difficult. How can technology be used not only as a pedagogical tool, but also as a democratizing force? And with the pandemic, we see that while education can reach more places, but at the same time, those that do not have an internet or good bandwidth, or do not have the ability to have a room for each student in the house, or many other things that we have seen, make it that is, that is really the digital divide is even more pronounced. So who we reach with technology, and how can we make it a democratizing force, was the second of the questions. The third one was, things are changing. students, the high school students do not generally always go the traditional way from high school to college. Many are going first to the community colleges. Many are going to take gap years, experience somewhere and come back. And also several adults, working adults, have to come back to acquire new skills and competencies and credentials. And so the paths and the pathways are changing. And so how do these new pathways challenge higher education as we know it? And finally, how do people learn? We have a lot of evidence about how children and young adults learn, people who are in high school, people who are in kindergarten. But we do not know a lot how older adults learn, for example, and also how the context where they live, what they see, the type of work they do, how those affect the way they learn. So those were the guiding questions. So then the subcommittee decided to talk to institutions who were successful, getting very good student outcomes, being innovators, and also to thought leaders in different areas. And those are the names. Jim Spotter was one of them. Again, I'm not going to read them, but the subcommittee met with several people face to face and asked very interesting questions. And then the subcommittee decided that they're not going to make recommendations, that instead of making recommendations, they're going to do two things. Put forward a vision for the STEM education of the future. And second, talk about the priorities, the challenges, and potential actions, but particularly the priorities, and that would be the end of the report. And so I'm not going to read the vision, but it's here for you to see. So this is basically, a summary of what the report has. I'm going to be silent for a few seconds so that you can read it.
It's pretty difficult to see on this screen. Maybe you
Okay.
do us the...
Okay, so I read it. Thank you, Martha. So all citizens can contribute to our nation's progress and vibrancy. To be prepared for the STEM careers of the future, all learners must have, let me just move my screen a little, must have an equitable opportunity to acquire foundational STEM knowledge. The STEM education of the future brings together our advanced understanding of how people learn with modern technology to create more personalized learning experiences, to inspire learning, and to foster creativity from an early age. It will unleash and harness the curiosity of young people and adult learners across the United States, cultivating a culture of innovation and inquiry, and ensuring our nation remains the global leader in science and technology discovery and competitiveness. So that's, it took us several weeks to craft this. Let me just, I am not being able to advance. Let me see. Something happened that I'm not able to advance the slide. Let me see.
You may want to just stop your share and then restart it if you need to.
It worked. It worked
Okay.
now.
Good.
Okay, so I'm just going to go very briefly because I don't want to hijack the meeting. So few priorities, and the one in yellow is the one that probably it's more related to this, and it's about the challenge is the pathways to attain an undergraduate degree and or competencies required for a STEM job are changing. That's the challenge. And one of the actions was we must consider the new ways that companies seek to fulfill the STEM jobs of the future and the implications of these changes on how learners need to prepare. So to acquire these core 21st century competencies, they need adaptability, which are adaptability, flexibility, collaboration, etc. So that, I'm going to make available the presentation, and there is also a link to the report, for those that want to read it. But I'm just highlighting things that are related to this workshop and why we funded this workshop. Priority 2 is build an ethical STEM workforce with future-proof skills. And again, the action recommended is STEM education must prepare our workforce to innovate and work with modern technologies, and also to consider their societal effects. And of course, for an ethical workforce has a place to work, and we need to hear then from industry to know exactly what we believe at NSF or at the university probably has some differences of what is the experience of the actual employers with the students that we are producing. Okay, again, give me 2 seconds. It's not moving. Okay, and the third one and last is about virtual learning spaces. And it's 3A and 3B. 3A is how can we use technology and in virtual learning spaces, and also in-person spaces. And then B is how can we prepare the educators to actually be good teachers in those spaces. And so that has to be, has a close relationship, months later to the pandemic. Again, it's probably my computer that is getting. Okay, if I stop sharing, maybe.
Computers don't work. It's a well-kept secret.
Yeah, let me stop sharing and then share again. I have a few more. Okay, let's see. Approve.
And Alex, just a time check also.
Yes,
Have,
I think I'm going to
minutes.
stop here, because for some reason it's not working. And but basically the whole idea is we have this. This is not the only, of course, initiative that we had. At the end of the day, the lessons that we learned from let me just stop sharing here. From the innovators of education was that education has to be student-centered and personalized and equitable with the lenses of equity. Not we're not talking about just bringing all the students from all backgrounds to the classroom, but we are talking about when we teach, what is that we teach. And there were other interesting things for the worker adults, worker learners, I'm sorry. Yeah, so now I am having a problem that it's, and I don't know how to solve this. Let me see.
I think you just clicked on the whiteboard, and so you're actually writing on your slides.
Okay. And how do I stop doing that? Okay, let me see if this is, yeah. Okay, so let me stop again. Okay. So this is the background and the context in which we funded this workshop and other initiatives of the National Academies, and also in regarding the STEM education of the future, but also regarding the COVID-19 pandemic in the classrooms, the effect of the COVID-19 pandemic in higher education. And with that, I'm just going to stop here.
Thank you so much, Alex, for that context. So next, I'll turn it over to Dr. Martha Russell, who will be moderating the panel. And also, just a note for the presenters, could you please email Gonzalo your presentations? For those of you who joined late, I have issues with bandwidth and can't do anything on my end. So this way, Gonzalo has a backup if he needs to share your presentation. And Gonzalo, could you share your email with everyone on the chat?
I'll do that right now.
I can't even access that. Thank you so much.
Okay, it's in the chat.
Thank you. Martha, it's all yours.
Oh, thank you. And pleasure to be with all of you today. And I want to thank Alex, Yasi, ISSIP, especially our panelists today for the group putting together the program itself, for their commitment and diligence to bringing together ideas that we'll share today and for the next couple of workshops. Things have changed in the past 18 months. It was different for me today. I didn't drive down Highway 101 to come to the meeting. I didn't get hugs when I came into the meeting, and I love the hugs. If I had been there in person, Rick, Michelle, Nate, Alex, Heather, you all would have received a hug from me. And so we've become very good at workarounds, as you can see. We're dealing with the PowerPoint presentations in a different way than we had planned. And that agility and flexibility is one of the things that we have all learned, I think, through the pandemic. Today's presentations, discussions are going to tap into the larger context of talent as the new gold in this era of global and interdependencies. We know that it's one world. The pandemic has certainly taught us that in a new way. But we're going to bring this into focus for the United States with 6 leading authorities who will share their experiences and insights. And in the 90 minutes that follows, each of them will take about 10 minutes to share their background, their context, and some of the top takeaways that they have seen in their experiences and the insights from them about how the COVID has changed the need for skills of the new hires coming into the workforce. Rick Rafey, Vice President of Product and Customer Success in Orbit. Michelle Gould, Distinguished Engineer and Data Security and Privacy Strategist at Cisco. Nate Timon, Director of Strategic Workforce Planning and Early Talent at Red Hat. Alex Cass, Fellow and Principal Director at Accenture. Heather Yorko, Vice President of Digital Talent at MasterCard. So it's an incredible group of experiences we will be able to benefit from. And to set some context, I would like to share some thoughts that came from the World Economic Forum's 2021 report on the workforce futures, looking at the impact of automation in tandem with COVID-19 in creating a double disruption scenario for workers. So in addition to the current disruption from the pandemic-induced lockdowns and economic contraction, the technological adoption by companies has transformed tasks and jobs and skills and will continue to for the next couple of years. In surveys that were done for the World Economic Forum, 43% of the businesses surveyed indicated that they are set to reduce their workforce due to technology integration. 41% plan to expand their use of contractors for specialized work. 34% plan to expand their workforce due to technology integration. So by 2025, the time spent on current tasks at work by humans and machines is anticipated to be equal. Interesting. And a significant share of companies also expect to make changes to locations, their value chains, and the size of their workforce due to the factors beyond technology in the next 5 years. So we're looking at transformation, and the thoughts that our panelists will share today, the discussion that we'll have afterward, is intended to anticipate what we can do to be ready in every way for that. So with that brief introduction, I would like to introduce Rick Rafey. And Rick, ask you to share your experiences and insights with us to get us started. Let me say that I would ask for you to please make note of your questions. And after all of the panelists have spoken, we'll have time for Q&A. I have a few questions. I've gathered a few also, but we're eager to involve everyone in the conversation. So please make a note of the questions that you want to ask or send them to me in the chat. And at the end of all 6 thought leaders, we will open for discussion. Rick, you're on.
Great.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Martha. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, we sure
Perfect.
can.
Okay, so my name's Rick Rafey. I've spent 30 plus years in the tech industry. Right now I'm at a company named InOrbit, which is a robotics startup in Silicon Valley. And we're distributed internationally in the team. So I was actually working remotely before the pandemic with this team. So it was a pretty easy shift for us, but I have a lot of observations from that experience and I'm very passionate about this topic. I actually went the traditional route into tech. I have a master's in CS. I went to UVA undergrad in Brown for my master's. I have led engineering teams and product teams for years. And I've hired dozens of employees across large and small companies. So I'm basically the hiring manager. We have some really great people on the recruiting side and who have a completely different vantage point. But as a hiring manager, I am focusing this talk on advice to the learners and the people that would actually be taking these jobs. And I think there'll be a lot of other advice in materials that people are presenting on what government can do, et cetera, what companies can do. I also volunteer and am on several advisory boards for helping advance STEM education. So my approach here today was talking about the real takeaways where the pandemic, it's hard. We have some recency bias because we're sitting in the middle of the pandemic, or not in the middle, but hopefully near the end of the pandemic. But it's hard to say what's going to last, what's going to take hold. And so the approach I took with this talk was to come up with a set of assertions that I think are just worth thinking about. They're basically things that people might say are conclusions we can draw. And what I've done is I've created hypotheses around each of these and then decided what would be some interesting advice to learners around these. So this one's the most obvious. Hybrid workplace model is here to stay. I'm sure plenty of people will be talking about this, and it's been brought up in various forms. But really, what it comes down to is there's a spectrum of people. Before the pandemic, I knew 2 people who were like, I'm going to be remote. I don't care what it takes. That's what I'm going to do. And I thought of them as sort of rogues and cool and interesting. And now there's a whole set of, a third of the population or a quarter of the population is wanting that exact model. But other people really want to get back to work. And so what happens is you have this fragmentation where people were typically being close to headquarters and close to the executive team, and having FaceTime is really important. And so now you have to figure out how to change the organizational communication structure to make sure that the people who are making that choice to be remote, or companies that are making choice across the board for people to be remote, that those practices are working, and that's really, I think, one of the most important things for companies and the people in the companies. So as learners and as workers, the idea is to help shape and embrace the practices, like not just understand what the practices are, they're different from what you had in school or in your personal life, but actually helping work with the company to make it what you think it should be, Compartmentalization is absolutely critical. Anybody working from home had to deal with this a lot before the pandemic. Planning time. I want to make a special point about signaling availability. A lot of people suffer from the fact that now that they're working from home, they're always working. And I think it's really important for people to be able to signal their level of unavailability, like I'm away from a keyboard, I'm completely unreachable, etc. Those are really important considerations to maintain sanity and maintain balance. Spontaneous conversations are why people are in the office in many ways. I mean, we can substitute meetings with these kind of things, but spontaneous conversations, people should be really open to just jumping on a call with somebody. And sometimes that's not as natural to do if you're just working from remotely. And then one thing that has always been the case is being a thought leader, but it's especially important when people aren't even in the office and seeing each other. I mean, you can always stand out as a thought leader. So I think that's just redoubled in this case. Okay, so another key outcome of the pandemic is people understand even more why STEM is so important. And it's not just you should get a good job or I mean, there's some element of that, but it's really that it's a more important thing in our society in vision. People have seen what STEM professionals are doing and able to do to help with these problems. So my advice here is to, as a learner, look at what's changed, look at what opportunities, what new things are out there and what you want to offer. And then to a point that was made in the earlier talk about how education is changing. Applied versus traditional is another one of those continuums. And you really need to be thinking about most of the skills. If we actually look at these lists of skills, a lot of them are very much more applied, along with being essential, what have been called soft skills. But that's really important for people to be very conscientious about that. I took a more traditional academic approach, but I actually really like applied people when I'm hiring these days. And let's go on. Another point is data science. I don't think data has ever been in the headlines in everybody's lives more than it has been in the last couple of years. And data literacy is enormous, and people are learning more and more about data, but they're learning it in different ways. And now there's this whole trove of data just about the pandemic. So my guidance here is just look at data science in whatever field interests you, because it's going to matter, and figure out how much it matters to you, the data part of it, and take that coursework. It really is going to be established as a core field, or I mean, it already is. I knew plenty of people before the pandemic that were going into this and really finding nice career paths that they were excited about. Also think about how you dealt with data, like what resonated with you, what did you look for, what sources did you trust, and then apply it in any issue you care about. Another one that's a little more hard to say in this world right now is that, following the science, everybody seems to think they are in one form or another if they're not outright rejecting it. And one of the takeaways I really wanted to say here, and this is less for the learners, but it's for the learners as a longer term lesson, scientists just aren't that great at communicating their findings. And that people get confused. And right now we're in what I would call a post-truth era. I've definitely heard professors call it that. And so people, find their own science that distorts things. And so it's really important to focus on science that's borne out in data with rigorous process. I had the luxury at UVA of taking ethics as part of my engineering education, and I absolutely just it's striking to me when I find people in the industry that aren't in that mindset, and it's so critical now at like to up and down. So I would say that's a really important thing to be focusing on, and then also mastering, to the point of the scientists not being able to communicate very well. Master explaining results to people who don't know your domain. I think a lot of people stay in their little bubbles in their domains, and when they're talking to other people, they just talk right over their heads. And we've seen that in the public very much lately with the pandemic. So I'm working for a robotics company, and I really like that Martha made this point. By 2025, time spent on current tasks at work by humans and machines will be equal. Automation's been around forever, as long as humanity's been around, basically. But we're in a real watershed moment right now. And my personal feeling from being in a robotics company is that if if the pandemic if automation were 5 years further, the impact would have been completely different. Just because you would have been able to replace so much work and workers at close quarters with robots. And so it's going to happen. People do need to upskill. I mean, every report is all about how, those low-wage workers with low skills are really going to be struggling to find work. And so it's important to be mindful of that and make sure that people can upskill. So basically, my advice here is reflect on any career path that you're taking and how automation will impact what's going to change in that path based on automation. And robotics is great. There's like so many interesting parts of robotics that you can enter it from any different direction. And then finally, where do the humans fit in? Where in the loop are the humans with respect to those robots? Because they're not all just working and everybody calls it a day. So from that World Economic Forum report that Martha was referencing, this is a pretty deep slide. My last slide is just some reference material, but this report is really good. And all 3 reports that I have in my last slide are useful. So hopefully those will be shared. And they talk about these skills. They break them down into really good areas. I would really make a big point about initiative. I think that's really fundamental and important and something I really look for in people. But obviously problem solving and things like that are ranking very high. But it is really interesting to see how many of these jobs are computer science oriented. It's almost STEM jobs. Everybody wants to get kids into STEM jobs, but at some point I've heard that 70% of the STEM jobs are actually computer science. But data also transcends computer science. So I think at that level, that's why I made that point. Anyway, so I know I'm at my 10 minutes, but I wanted people to at least know that these reports exist. They're all really worth reading. And so hopefully they'll be sharing this. And that's my talk.
We do intend to share. And thank you so much, Rick. It's a wonderful frame that you have painted for us. And now we're going to begin to fill in that frame with a number of perspectives. Michelle, if you are ready, would you take the floor next, please?
Yes, I will, and hopefully my slides are showing by now.
Yes.
Yes. All right. So good afternoon, everyone. So Michelle Gell, I'm a long-term employee and distinguished engineer at Cisco with a focus around data security and privacy. I am currently working in the customer experience CTO office, and the perspective I wanted to bring today is really a use case of you can do collaborative innovation in this new normal distributed and diverse workforce, and show you a couple of programs that were born during the pandemic, flourish, and have actually, one of which has become one of the most successful programs at Cisco that really put to practice some of these areas that we've talked about, and the need for more diversity, the need for, we're working remote, how do you actually have an innovative mindset and create new things and bring them to the forefront. And I mean, the pandemic changed life for companies, right? Almost overnight, we had to learn to work remotely and do it effectively, but it also changed for customers because their expectations changed, their needs changed in terms of in terms of the different types of products they needed, and their expectation in terms of turnaround and time for getting problems resolved. So the premise is this created an opportunity and a need to change the way we innovate, to do it in a quicker, faster, and more diverse format. And so my perspective is I came to this team in January of this year, and the team was transformation, right? It's a chief technology office. So what we're supposed to do is innovate. We're all about innovate. We're all about looking into the future. The team was formed during the pandemic. It brought a number of individuals together and formed a CTO office under a leader. And I think the initial team was maybe less than 20 or around 20 when I joined the team. And during this year, the team has actually doubled in size. We're over 40, and we have expanded out into 4 key areas in terms of trying to do this innovation, right? We have a group that's focused on the whole strategic transformation around what are we doing in the cloud? with respect to our offering. How are we moving to multi-cloud automation? We've heard a lot about automation, and it's all about automation, right? We have a performance innovation. This is how do we help our customers? How do we get better at decreasing the amount of time it takes to handle their cases? What automation can we do there? All the different things that they do in terms of providing support. How do we give a better customer experience in the bounds that we have? Emerging incubation, which is the area that I'm focusing on, is about what are those new technologies coming down the pike that we have to think about, and how do we drive that architectural alignment across Cisco, and then a whole group on technology, intelligence, and strategy. They run, this is where they run the innovation programs, the hackathons, and provide the program leadership across the board. So this all did transformation literally in the last year. We have people from, I think, 11 or 12 different countries. We have about 30% gender diversity, which is outstanding. We have age, we have experience diversity across the board. And this was done intentionally, right? When we're going after new hires, it's like, what do we need if we're not getting the right, we don't have the right interview candidates, or we're not looking in the right place? And there was a lot of very specific, hey, we're looking for these kind of skills and to bring in this type of diversity. So we've created a very, I think, a well-oiled machine at this point, very diverse, very creative, and very innovative. Our keys for growth throughout this were around, obviously around diversity was a big part of it. The key technologies that we're focused on, you heard Rick talk about automation, but it's been about cloud, security, and automation have been the big ones. And our mindset is really about how do you do that innovative thinking? How do you do teams or cohort-oriented, right? It's not about everybody has to have the same level of skills. You can bring together a diverse group of people where, you know, maybe someone's an expert coder or super good on cloud and someone else understands the whole artificial intelligence. How do you create models? The data science, and when you put that team together, you have a very strong team. And it's also about process. How do you make it repeatable, defined, streamlined, and actually doable? So one of the programs that was totally that was created during this, what we call the Women's Inventor Network. Now, the reason this came about is because the number of women listed on patents, not only at Cisco, but in the industry was very, very low. And so this is creating a program specifically, not just, I mean, women were the focus, but everyone was welcome, right? We were trying to create more diversity in the whole invention process and actually have patents that were submitted that had a diverse submission board. And so the Women's Inventor Network had been around, and it had different focuses, so we kind of grew off that, and we added the plus because it wasn't just about women, it was about diversity and cultivating this diverse set of inventors. And so how these are run is they do 4 a year. We, you know, and I'll have a slide that kind of has some numbers, but we assign groups and teams of 4 with a mentor. A mentor is someone who's done the innovation, they understand the process, they're actually mentoring. These aren't only newer in career, they're people who've never actually been in a patent developing, IP developing process, so we're teaching them new skills. The expectation is going to spend 3 to 4 hours a week, and this is like a 14-week program. I love the quote here, like from one person, like they thought you had to have a PhD or a high degree to actually do inventorship and innovation, and she learned that's not the case. I actually heard her speak this morning, and we had a kickoff of our cohort 4. So this program is about connecting people across diverse backgrounds, diverse interests, and geographies, right? We have multi-geographical teams. Sometimes the team, like I'm assigned to a team now that's based out of China, and they're interested in automation. So I'll be their mentor through this process. It's about growing people, helping engineers grow their technical skills, their presentation skills, their research skills across the board. It's about collaborating and innovating, and it's about collusion. All this is done remotely using available collaboration tools, you know, WebEx, we have Teams, we have SharePoint, and connecting on a regular basis. This program has become one of the most successful programs at Cisco. We're just starting our 4th cohort, but you could see we had, the number of teams from the first cohort, which was last, actually it started, I think, around last December of a year ago. We had about 100 people. We had 9 approved, 62 patent submissions, which we call CPOL Cisco Patents Online, and 9. We just finished cohort 3. We had a whopping 59 teams. So we're talking, times 4, how many participants we had. Multiple teams did multiple CPOL submissions, and we had 114 first-time CPOL submitters. So you can see the successful. So this shows you can have a very diverse group of people. You can actually innovate in a completely remote setting. It's about developing those muscles and those skill sets that you need. And it's about, these are opportunities in terms of the talent, the war on talent and needs. When you give people these opportunities to participate in the program that's going to, with a level playing field, everybody's remote. Hey, you don't have to have a PhD and you don't have to have an expert. Pair them up with a technical leader in the industry, right, some of the top technical talent at their company, and they get an opportunity to work with these people over the course of 12 to 14 weeks. This is a game changer in terms of attracting and retaining and developing talent there. And so the next program I want to talk about briefly was Hack at Home in the Innovative Pipeline Process. It's all about failing fast and succeeding often. And I love this quote, right? Innovation comes from everywhere and in many different forms, but it really needs to be aligned, must be aligned to strategic priorities and to be both impactful and successful, right? It's not just about creating something. We have to create something that aligns to where the industry going is right now. What about, what is the future of work? What are we doing in terms of AI and automation? What does it look like in the 5G world and the IoT space, right? What are the problems facing the industry right now?
Just a time check, 1 more minute.
Okay, so key innovation principles here, which you can read on there, right? It's really about failing fast and learning well. And yeah, so the Hack at Home, right? We did this sort of in the cohort thing, again, much like the Patents Online, 8 to 10 week commitment, completely virtual teams. And I think the key here is we focused on key strategic initiatives, and we also focus on repeatable processes. You'll get the slide so you could see it. So we baked it out, and we were continued to develop the muscles in this repeatable processes. Everybody understood it. We could take ideas from many different areas. We could run it through. We could fail fast. If it was a failure, we could move on, and we could also learn from it and then up-level it for the next generation. That's it.
Oh, that's fabulous. Not only how it works, but a guide to take you through the journey. Inspirational for sure. Absolutely. Nate, let me ask you to come on next, if you would.
All right. Thank you, Martha. And thank you, everybody. So I don't have any slides, so I'll just be going just the old-fashioned version of communication today. But I appreciate being invited. I always enjoy attending and participating in these workshops. So thank you again for thinking of me this time. So my perspective in this was thinking from a personal level of how COVID affected me and other observations I've had, and then tying it to some of the work I'm doing currently. So, but before I get to that, just a bit of an introduction. So I just started at Red Hat recently. I was at Blue Cross Blue Shield, North Carolina for the previous few years. Prior to that, I worked at Cisco with good friends like Heather Yurko. Hello, Heather. And I currently lead the strategic workforce planning and early talent team at Red Hat, as was mentioned earlier in my intro. So when I think about the biggest changes or impacts, and some of, I think Rick and Michelle both, and Martha, all three sort of mentioned a bit, sort of the need for versatility, for adaptability, both from the company's perspective and from the individual's perspective. And I know all of us would agree. There was no script. I think Rick said no one knows the future. I agree. there was no script for this. And so we very much had to figure out on the fly, how do we make life and work and careers normal again, or are as normal as they can be, while creating as we go. As Martha mentioned too, about had we been in person, there would have been hugs. I thought too, from a similar perspective of what is the definition of a career? What is the definition of a normal work environment these days? I mean, is there really one? I mean, I think of myself, a prerequisite was always location. If you, at least in my experience in my career, even as a knowledge worker, I still was expected to be able to have to drive to an office to be near my boss or my coworkers or my customers. And that need to be in a certain location drove a lot of important life decisions. I know for me, I grew up in the Northeast and I worked in the Northeast as a result. When I had an opportunity with Cisco for a new job, part of that expectation for me was that I would move my family to North Carolina to take that job, to be with my team. Thankfully for me at the time, personally, that was something I was open to. I was open to living in North Carolina anyway, but that was certainly a very important part of the whole decision about where would my career go, what opportunities would I even have. So now though, and I would say too, even back then, working for a company like Cisco, where there was, I would say, more autonomy for employees about what their work hours were. There was some freedom, depending on what your role was, but generally some freedom to maybe drive into the office a couple hours later or leave the office a couple hours earlier to miss rush hour traffic in either direction. And so that was a great perk for being an employee, and that kind of expectation, because it was important to not have to sit in traffic for a long time. With the pandemic, though, obviously we weren't, at least most of us weren't working in a physical office. We actually weren't allowed to work in a physical office anymore. So it made me think of companies who used the flexibility of when you would go into an office as a competitive differentiator. That's really not a competitive differentiator anymore, or at least not nearly what it was. I would say too, at my previous employer, we, being in the healthcare field and being a relatively small company located in Durham, fighting in that war for talent, for some of the same talent that other, sexier employers in the triangle were also trying to recruit, particularly in the STEM area. One of the competitive advantages we had there was, well, if you work for us and let's just say you're an actuary in this case, you sort of get to live rather in the triangle, where the weather is nicer and the pace is slower, you might say, the cost of living is lower than some of the other competitive places where an actuary might work, say in Connecticut, for example, or New York City. With the pandemic, though, we really had trouble now hanging on to the actuaries at Blue Cross, because they could still live in North Carolina, but they could also work for a company in Hartford or in New York City and not move and get a higher salary. So again, from a competitive standpoint, companies really need to think about what is our competitive edge as an employer. Fast forwarding now to my current role, and particularly the early talent part, I think about the need again to be adaptable and versatile as an employer, because there is a war for talent. Now at Red Hat, I'm happy to say I walked into a situation where there was a lot of good work happening already from the early talent recruiting standpoint, but this is still a need for us to differentiate, sort of diversify our strategy to work with universities, colleges, recent grads, community groups, professional organizations, et cetera, to find that talent. And so I think, again, it's incumbent on companies in roles like mine to really try, again, have a differentiated approach. So, we're working with, you need to work with current traditional college students. You need to work with non-traditional college students. You need to work with recent graduates. You need to work with continuing ed programs in community colleges and other places. You need to have a variety of programs. So it can't just be the traditional summer internship for a traditional four-year university anymore. You also need to have, semester-long co-op opportunities, apprenticeships, rotational development programs, as well as covering a variety of different disciplines. So including STEM majors, but also non-STEM majors, and also various strategies depending on what geography you're also working with. So there's so many variables that it's a complex puzzle, but I think it's one of the realities that more and more companies have to deal with. From the employee standpoint, I think it's almost all good news. I think employees have so many options that there'll be some good career path with some strategy and planning that a thoughtful student and maybe their advisors, academic advisors and such can find. So I think it's an encouraging, optimistic view for the employee in general, but still is a new way of thinking and a new way of strategizing and partnering, et cetera. So that's my talk. But I look forward to being part of the panel and having further discussions with the rest of my my colleagues and all of the other participants. So thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Nate. So there's a war going on. It's a war for talent, and it's not local. That's another very important component of the picture that we're painting this morning. Thank you very much for that perspective. And Alex, let me ask you to share some of your ideas. I think you have a presentation. Can you screen share to get started? Great.
Yeah, is this working?
It is. It's working well. Thank you.
Amazing. I used to have a fear of public speaking that I was nervous about talking. Now I'm nervous about getting the technology to work. So I guess it's always something. But thanks everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. And I really appreciate I've got a passion for this topic of all the topics related to the technology and the workforce and the various interrelations they have. So I really appreciate your willingness to spend some of your valuable time listening to me today. I sort of frame this as closing the workforce experience gap because even before the pandemic, I feel like a lot of companies do have what we call a workforce experience gap. It's the pandemic has intensified but not initiated it. So the pandemic, in some sense, helps us put a magnifying glass on it, which from a researcher's point of view, is helpful. But everything from shifting expectations of the workforce, the way technology is reshaping it, all of these have been here before and will be here after the pandemic is just a memory, hopefully. My goal is to talk about creating the foundation for thriving with and in the hybrid distributed post-pandemic workforce. So I'm interested in speaking to the concerns both of the individual worker and also of the companies that they work for. Just about myself, I'm the other Alex in this meeting, I work at Accenture in an R&D role in Accenture Labs. I currently lead the team that we call Digital Experiences globally, which is basically our human-centered computing group, human-computer interaction, human-centered computing. And so my perspective here is really shaped by two different forces, and I'm going to organize my presentation in that way. First of all, my perspective is shaped by my day-to-day experience operating in Accenture in a large, globally distributed organization, which I think has shaped a lot of how I think about how work is going to get done in this post-pandemic, highly distributed kind of hybrid environment. And then, so I'll talk a little bit about how that looks, how Accenture, how it works, and how we operate that way. And then the other thing that is really shapes my perspective is the work that me and my team do within that, which it has several different focus areas, but one of them is the future of work. And obviously we've inflected that to take into account all the changes that are happening as we move to this new era where the distributed workforce, which was something Accenture was always having to deal with because of the nature of our work, is becoming really, I think, the common in across almost all knowledge workers and even maybe beyond knowledge work. And we'll talk a little bit about that maybe if there's some time. So first of all, just about Accenture, for those of you who don't know, there's a lot to talk about that I don't have a chance, I don't have nearly enough time to talk about, so I'm just going to focus on the things that are relevant here. It's 624,000 people distributed across 200 cities in 50 countries. So even if I was going to the office every day, for instance, my team, which is only about 25 people, is spread across 3 continents. So there's no way I'm going to the office to meet with everyone every day. Um, uh, uh, we're focused on change. Let there be change is the motto. And we sit at the intersection of business and technology. That really shapes my perspective. I don't really think of STEM jobs as being about technology. I think of them as really the future is going to be more and more, I think, about how technology is maturing. A lot of the things we've thinking about being about just the algorithm are really becoming about how you apply it. Accenture doesn't have products. It's a services company, doesn't have products. It doesn't have factories, none of that to differentiate us. What differentiates us is our people. And and our ability to empower them to do amazing things. We have a lot of focus on those questions of how do you help a workforce operate effectively, especially when they have to do so in this distributed way. I work in a place called Accenture Labs, which is a small group of about 200 people in this large group, but it is also globally distributed. In part, that helps us understand the problems of larger globally distributed organizations. And this is the team, and I'm putting this up so you can see the very large diversity of experience that my leadership team brings. This is the folks who help lead the regional groups across the continent. We're focused on a number of different areas. The one that's most relevant to today, obviously, is the future of the workplace experience. And we really think that technology is going to enable rebuilding a better workplace experience than we had before. So it wasn't like it was great before. Now the pandemic messed it up. It was okay before. The pandemic has created some challenges and it maybe focused us on fixing the challenges before. And they include things like immersive teleoperation of robotic avatars. We want to be able to not just support knowledge workers, but also people that have to do physical work. So it's interesting. So big picture, I see there's being 4 distinct ways that technology is involved in reshaping work. And you need to think about them separately. So first of all, everyone's concerned, obviously, about who's concerned about the well-being of the workforce, that technology is eliminating some jobs, and that's going to cause disruption and displacement. I think in general, it'll be a good thing in the long term because most of those jobs that it's eliminating weren't great jobs anyway, but we do need to think about how we make sure there's a landing place that's better, not worse, for the people displaced. It's also creating entirely new kinds of work, like search engine optimization wasn't something anyone had obviously ever heard of before, or digital media and influence, social media influence is completely different. Tech platforms and applications also transforming the way existing work is getting done. That's one that's especially interesting to me, and I think gets less attention than the first 2 and deserves more. The kind of digital collaboration platforms like we're using right now, but also going forward into things like the metaverse, whether you like that term or not. I think Accenture just bought 100,000 Oculus for our new joiners. Of the 624,000 people I mentioned, 124,000 were added in the last year. About a third of the company, by my own reckoning, has now never actually been physically to the with the other people in the company. So we really are focused on new innovative ways for them to feel like they're together, even when they can't physically be so. And then the fourth is really that there's a lot of forces other than technology that are reshaping the workforce. The pandemic's just one of them, but everything from climate change and I think shifting worker expectations is just as important. And we have to be concerned about how do we create technology that will help everyone adapt to those situations. So there's a whole talk on this slide, which I won't be able to touch. I just want to mention a few things here. There's virtualizing the culture is going to be a very important challenge for people in the workforce. Accenture feels this particularly acutely, as I mentioned, that are being able to maintain a culture and use it to empower people to do amazing things is really what our business is based on. But it's true for every company, and it's getting harder when you can't be together. And how is technology going to help address that? I think is an important thing. And also, how are we going to train people to be able to engage, absorb a culture, and shape a culture when they're not physically present as much or physically together? Rethinking what the use of space is and making sure that in a hybrid workforce, people who are remote don't feel like second-class citizens. I think that's a big concern. A lot of people who are permanently remote were kind of given a reprieve from second-class citizenship during the pandemic because we were all remote. But when we come back together and most of us are in a meeting together and a couple are remote, that sucks for them. And how do we make it suck less for them? I think that's going to be really important. And then scaling workforce agility, the ability to, now that you're no longer stuck in a location, it no longer maybe makes sense for you to be as rigidly organized in an org chart, and being able to move to the projects that need you most is going to be really important. So we have a whole agenda around the R&D work we're doing in this space, using technology to accelerate skill and competence, to create frictionless collaboration, to protect the organizational health, culture, and individual well-being. How do I know that one of my employees is overly stressed out when I only get to see I don't get to see them in casual contact as much? It's going to be really important. And then intelligent things, onboarding and so forth, so that we can speed the ability to move someone into a new role, not just getting them technically enabled, though that's important, and customizing that for what they need to do, but also giving them the connections that are specific to what they need to do next. So I just wanted to sort of wind up with 3 quick touches on other thought leaders that I think have important things for us to think about. One is Peter Norvig, and he is really making the point here that he's a big AI guy, and AI algorithms has been what he's been focused on. And I think it's relevant that he's saying, look, the cleverness of the algorithm was important, but maybe we're there now. And maybe the next phase of progress is going to be a lot less about making the algorithm 1% better every year, and more about improving the way that we making sure it's a human-centered focus for technology. And I think when we think about
Time check,
STEM,
Alice. Excuse me.
yeah,
1 more minute.
1 more minute, great. I think I'm pretty much on time then,
Okay.
which is unusual for me. So exactly what do you want to optimize? Whose interests are you serving? I think getting people trained in STEM that are thinking about STEM as something that right from the beginning is a human-centered activity is going to be, those are going to be the really differentiated workers in the future. Another person I think is worth paying attention to is Pam Hines, who's done a lot of interesting work going way back to 2005, before the pandemic, which I think is even more important now, on things like what makes a distributed team work effectively? How do you establish a sense of shared identity when I'm in San Francisco and the rest of my team is in Bangalore, literally on the other side of the world? How do you create shared context? And she's done a lot of work showing the effect of not doing this, and what specifically how the different kinds of shared identity and context contribute to effective work. And then something we've been a little more directly involved in is thinking about how do operators share responsibility with robots, and when you have a semi-autonomous robot, which I think is going to be the important mode in the future, not fully autonomous, but where it's a human machine team, what does that look like? And having people trained in thinking about how humans and machines share responsibility, I think that's another crucial thing for STEM education to be thinking about. So I won't drain this slide because I only have a few seconds, but I've got a lot of thoughts about how this great framework that was put together in the last round has should be updated and should change. And I think there's almost just as we thought, the STEM skills have been changing fast, and it almost looks like a yesteryear list to me. That the ones going into the future, I think we need to be thinking about things like virtual reality much more significantly. It's here now, and it's going to become important in business, I think. And there's a whole lot of others. I think thinking specifically about this I'm trying to promote this acronym, hybrid distributed workforce, which I think is a key thing for everyone thinking about soft skills to be thinking. You have to train people with skills that are specific to that HDW. All right, that's it for me.
Oh, thank you, Alex. I think that you've added to the picture that we're painting the idea of culture and identity, and that the teamwork is not always with people, but sometimes includes working with virtual employees who may be avatars or robots. So interesting color to add. Heather, if you're ready, would you share your thoughts? And may I ask, while we get ready for our Q&A process, that if you have questions, please send them to me in the chat, and I'll create a queue and we'll work through them in about 20 minutes that we'll have left. Thank you. Heather, it's yours.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Martha. I think this is coming through okay. And I'm so thrilled to be here today and to see some current, former colleagues. Very, very exciting. So thanks so much for this opportunity. As had been mentioned previously, my name is Heather Yurko. I'm the Vice President of Digital Talent at MasterCard. The work that I have been doing with ISSIP and a bit with NSF has been over the last several years across many, many organizations. And so I'll share a little bit about some observations and conversations that I've had with folks through the pandemic, specifically around how organizational culture and skills really influence the success of transitioning to fully distributed work, whether we wanted it or not. And then also talking through some implications for what this means for folks that are coming into the workforce, or even perhaps adult learners that may be looking to shift within their current careers. One of the key quotes that I had read from a recent report from McKinsey was thinking about proximity and how much so many of us have really gotten used to throughout our careers, being close to people. So Martha, the hug resonated with me. I was like trying to give you a virtual hug, thinking about that, and just like, I know it's hard when we're not together because as humans, we desire that proximity. And so as we're thinking about proximity now is a consideration of work. So very much to Nate's point, where we work, how we work, the skills that we need, the organizational culture that we need, touching on what Alex just mentioned, things are very different now. And so in thinking through how do we maintain some of those connections to people, I'm very excited to go read the work that you just mentioned, Alex. I took a little screenshot of it because I was like, oh, I need to go look into that. How are we maintaining these cultures or creating new ways of creating a culture, when we are so far apart from each other? And three of the examples that I want to speak through today really were stark differences for me around how three very different cultures in three different industries really were set up for success, or perhaps some struggle as we went into the pandemic. So the three that I wanted to speak to today, one was a mature hardware and technology company. All of these are global, by the way, where really for this particular company, the way that they work globally was very flexible to time zones, meaning that there was a lot of consideration given as part of their culture around where in the world you worked. And so, you know, as just natural practice for everyone that works in this company, they generally check to see where, like, who's in this given meeting. Can we be flexible about when we meet? Can we maybe take turns as to who's early morning or who's late at night? That was just naturally part of their culture and the way that they work. A lot of the teams were very highly distributed, and there was some remote work happening at the company even prior to going into the pandemic. Strong focus on leveraging technology for meetings, strong focus on doing distributed co-creation. So a lot of tools were put in place for, you know, to really enable that, where you could do innovation, you could do co-creation. Agile methodologies were leveraged for all of their technical folks, especially within engineering. And that ability to really work around the clock, even within engineering teams or around the world, to follow the sun model was already in place pre-pandemic. And they have done a moderate amount of hiring of new grads. So over the past, say, 7 or 8 years, a lot of focus in infusing early in career talent, STEM graduates into the organization. The number at the bottom, the 54%, that was their stock differentiation during the pandemic. So from the beginning of the pandemic until now, their stock price has risen 54%. Just to kind of tie this back to, like, what does a company like this look like? How successful are they, even during really tough times? So this is sort of one organization. A second organization was a rapidly expanding media company who, again, very global organization, very flexible to time zones, but also sensitivity to well-being. There was a very, very strong focus in this organization around taking care of yourself, around mental health, around ensuring that you weren't working too much or too long for too long a period of time. You know, paying attention to really checking in with each other. How are you doing today? Is there anything I can do to help or support? A lot of emphasis on managers supporting their teams as a primary role. So how are you showing up and showing care to your organization? The interesting thing is that this particular organization was very highly co-located. So in spite of the fact that distributed work happened, you would have people across various sites working together and co-creating. Remote work was really not a thing at this company, meaning you might be distributed, but you are absolutely in the office. So you are showing up, you are there, you're working very closely with people right next to you day to day. Again, very strong use of technology for meetings and in co-creation. This was very natural to the way that everybody there worked. This company, however, did not adopt Agile prior to the pandemic. It was created in Agile. So the very fiber and fabric of their being really came from this Agile methodology, really emergent creation, just kind of like seeing how things go. We're going to start creating it. We're going to get feedback. We're going to continue to develop. So very strong continuous improvement. And very strong, almost aversion to things like road mapping, you know, where it really was like, we're going to keep developing in a way that is reflective of what people need, and accelerated hiring of new grads. So vast majority of the company was coming straight out of STEM organizations, and a lot of emphasis focused on bringing those folks in first, and then either like promoting people internally to manage or bringing in additional layers of leadership afterwards. Fascinating thing, stock rose 95% during the pandemic. So really, really interesting to see how, even though a company was very strongly co-located in the really in the fiber of their being, because I think of that underlying agility and being able to like rapidly shift, they were able to pivot very, very quickly and meet all of their customer and user needs, as well as internal employee needs during that period of time. And then finally, the last organization that I wanted to speak with was a growing fintech. Again, company is very global in nature, but tends to be very US centric. So although they're located all over the world, vast majority of employees are in the US and are also very, very highly co-located. The other interesting thing about this organization is that they remain even today very siloed. There's not a lot of remote work that was going on prior to the pandemic. Some of that has started to shift coming out of the pandemic, but it's still not very pervasive. They have already done return to office, and so they have some, specifically within the US, and so many of their sites are open, and there's an expectation that at least 2 days a week, people are showing up physically again in the office. Again, with all the normal caveats of like, you have to be vaccinated, proof of test, all the other good stuff. Within this company, there is some technology that's leveraged for meetings, but it is still evolving. As far as, what is used, do people know how to best leverage technology? There is a very, very strong emphasis still around older ways of working. So loads of emails, loads of meetings, throughout the day. There's a real emphasis in the culture placed on FaceTime and building relationships. And so as we look at this company, their move towards Agile has been slower. So physically adopting that methodology and saying, hey, we need to think more short term in how we deliver. We need to be more flexible in thinking about like, how are we continuously improving? We don't need to wait for a big bang. We can just get things out and continue to work. Also, slower hiring of new grads. A lot of the company's population is really that mid-career and later, as well as the levels are in that same space. And again, one of the fascinating things is that during the pandemic, only a 20% rise in stock price. So we start to see how some of these different cultures, how they're working, the skills that they have and the flexibility really have shifted, as far as what the impact is to them and their bottom line, as well as how people are showing up and additional work that still needs to be done in this new world. The fascinating thing about all three of these organizations, they would never think of each other as competitors, and yet they are all hiring very similar skills. So all three of these companies are hiring software developers, data scientists, people with security expertise, people with blockchain expertise. And so thinking about a war for talent or thinking about where we're pulling different skill sets from, this is where the culture starts to become very key to how different companies are able to really bring in the best talent. And as a STEM student, if I'm coming out, I have my pick, right? I can work for the best company in the world if I have some of these skills. And I need to understand, to ask questions about the culture, to understand the ways of working, because that is going to have a direct impact on my quality of life, depending on what organization I'm going to come out of school and, and start working with. Same for later in life learners. So as an adult learner, if I'm looking to shift careers, this becomes critically important if I'm looking for a different quality of life than what I may have had before. Really understanding this becomes critical. So what has changed? Very similar to what we have heard.
1 minute, Heather, if you would.
Thank you. What we've heard Rick mention before was really looking at what has shifted. And so again, we are moving away from that transactional kind of work. A lot of this is being moved to automation, and we're moving our people up the value stack. So really looking at having our people start to take on work that is differentiation for us as well as innovation. And so if we think about what this means for STEM students, it's going to be more than technical skills. This is really thinking across these various areas around process, data, and technical skills. But the key differentiator is really going to be people skills, which is something that we don't always talk about as much. We've had a really strong emphasis on these other areas, which absolutely are table stakes. But one of the key differentiators for new students coming into workforce is going to be their ability to have empathy, to influence remotely, to be able to collaborate remotely, key communication skills, being able to facilitate conversations. And so this is something else I would like for STEM educators to consider, that while all of these technical data and process pieces are absolutely critical, this one is also going to be a differentiator in the war for talent as the market does start to normalize and employers start to have a little bit more of a pick as far as who they want to hire. So that is it. Thank you very much for my time today.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you all. Nick, Rick, Alex, Michelle, Heather. I enjoyed my conversations with each of you as we prepared for today, and you've done a wonderful job of telescoping a lot of content that we discussed into 10-minute presentations, and I thank you. I know that that's very hard work. With kind of apologies to start, I think that Nate says there's no script for the future. Okay, we understand that. And I'm going to take the liberty of going off script from the questions that I sent the panelists earlier for them to anticipate responding to. I will keep an eye on the chat as well to look for questions from participants in the workshop. But let me start by asking a question that is kind of a national, international question. I mean, we are talking about global interdependencies. We are in a world of global dependencies, and today we're focusing on the talent pipeline coming from American higher education into the tech companies. But talk a little bit about talent from the American and global perspective. What's the role of the U.S. in this metaverse of talent? What thoughts can we have as we focus on the United States that keep us in the global context? I'm going to start with you, Heather, because your perspective included several organizations, and then ask Nate if you would comment, and Alex next.
Thanks so much, Martha. You know, as I'm thinking about especially these three countries, I'm sorry, the three companies that I was working with in, you know, connection to the role of the US. It is a fascinating thing, I will say, as far as how our role in the world, the United States role in the world, has shifted over the last few years. And you know, as I'm thinking through how the companies that I'm mentioning, you know, really have become more and more broad and global, I do think that as Americans and, you know, within our country, we do need to be far more sensitive than perhaps we have in the past to how we show up and how we maybe focus on having US centricity to the way in which we work, the hours in which we work, the ways in which we work, the ways in which we view the world. Because, you know, to Nate's earlier point, if we can hire from anywhere, we can hire from anywhere. And that means, you know, Americans can also work anywhere, as well as, you know, bringing in talent from other parts of the world. So what I start to see over time is a bit more integration around, you know, even things as basic as how we celebrate the holidays that we celebrate, being more culturally attuned to what is happening with our employees at different parts of the world, at different stages of their careers. And I'm making this much more about the people than, you know, us as a country or government, but I do think that it always comes down to the people. You know, the people that we have, the talent that we have access to. When people really have the choice to work for anyone, anywhere in the world, there's a lot to be considered there, because, you know, would I rather work for a company that I know is going to respect my needs to have time off for Diwali versus somebody who doesn't care and is going to make me work straight through it?
Yeah.
You know, it really becomes a huge differentiator. And so something that I think, you know, as employers, we absolutely need to focus on more and more. As employees, we have the choice and need to be asking these questions around what is best going to support me, my family, you know, as I'm looking for, you know, making a living or making a career in the world.
Great. Thank you. Nate, how about some thoughts from you on this topic of the U.S. and global perspective and what it means for
Sure,
talent?
thank you. And thank you, Heather, for going first and giving me a little more time to think. I I agree with what Heather said too. I feel like I'm thinking of things like, as Americans, without being too political here, we're good at thinking we're the best at everything, may I say, in a lot of cases. And in some cases it's true, probably, but in other cases it probably isn't. And even if we are the best in anything, I think it's important for us to realize that being a lone wolf um, is not as effective as collaborating successfully and effectively with others. Again, relying on the true strength of diversity of perspectives and experience, um, knowledge, etc. I think that maybe the lessons we're learning through COVID would be good lessons for our political leaders in our country, the United States, to observe and learn from. One other thought I was thinking of when Heather was speaking about the celebrating holidays, et cetera, in other countries, which I agree. Maybe there's a silver lining in the fact that when for those of us who are working remotely and no longer having that FaceTime in person, or the hugging, opportunity to hug in person as often, hasn't it also lowered the I don't know, the barrier, the veil, I guess, between us and those who live on the other side of the world? In other words, this morning I had a conversation with someone on my team in Singapore. I have never seen him before in person. I may never see him in person, but to me, he is, he's a face on a square, like in front of me, just like somebody who might live next door would be a face on a square. And so is that, I guess I'm not sure exactly where I'm going, other than to say, I think there's an opportunity for us to to start to value more those from very different cultures and countries, because our experience working with them isn't all that different than it would have been with people in person. Anyway, so maybe there's hope that we can follow through with that, and it becomes more of a sharing, collaborative world and less about who lives where.
Thank you for that. Alex, can you comment? Yeah, I mean, you're immersed in this yourself personally, and the role of the United States in preparing STEM talent in the perspective of the global war for talent.
Sure.
A few comments.
It's interesting. I don't always think in these terms because I work for a company people think of as an American company. Its roots are in the U.S., but the largest country from an Accenture perspective in terms of number of employees is India. And a third of my team is in India, and I live in San Francisco, but a third of the team is 11 and a half time zones away in India, and another third is in France. Our CEO lives in New Jersey, and previous CEO also lived in Paris. And I don't tend to think oftentimes during my workday about national identity as much as I used to. And that's I think in some ways a good thing. But in my personal life, I certainly do. And so my personal views, these are kind of more personal views than anything officially the company view. I want to make that clear. From the Accenture's point of view, the biggest comparative advantage that American workers had was that America is the biggest market, and our people could be closer to the clients. And so physical proximity still is an important issue for a lot of kinds of work, but I think that is evaporating. As you can see, we're not physically proximal now. There's still a time zone issue, but relying on, oh, I'm always going to have a competitive advantage because I'm closer to my customers, I think that's a dwindling advantage over time. So we have to be competitive in terms of the basic skills. But where are we going to be? Where is the U.S.? Where are my kids and your kids, if you're American, going to have a competitive advantage? And my personal view is there's really one thing that still stands out about the U.S. is diversity. The fact that my neighbors' kids, my neighbors were born in different countries than I was, and that my kid goes to school with half the kids who go to his school grew up speaking, their parents speak a different first language than English. Um, the thing that I think we need to prepare all workers for is working on distributed, diverse teams. And if you're growing up in a diverse culture, one, as other people are saying, that respects other cultures, the risk for the U.S. is not respecting other cultures enough and being too insular. But because the other markets are growing quickly and we can't just service our own. But the competitive advantage that we can play on if we choose to really treat it as a strength and an advantage is just the diversity of, the fact that if we want to have a brainstorming session about how to serve a new growing market, we probably have people in our town who grew up in that country, and if they're part of our team, that's going to be how we win.
That's great. Thank you, Alex. I want to ask a question to Michelle and also to Rick, and then go to Alex, the other Alex, for a question, and then to Tom Holman for a question. Do we have time to do that, Yasi? I take that as a yes. So my question, Michelle and Rick, has to do with the fact that we're talking about educating people, and yet we're talking about people working with virtual employees, maybe robots with avatar, maybe different kinds of automation, but nevertheless, people working with non-people as being perhaps a 50-50 balance in the future. What does this mean for the kind of skills that the new workers need to bring into the workforce? Michelle, maybe you would go first, and then Rick.
Okay, that's an interesting question. I know we talked about this a little bit, but like half the people I'm working with are non-humans or robotics. I would think in terms of tools, right? We have so many tools that provide automation, and what comes to mind is in the programming landscape, right? We used to have to sit down and write our own code from scratch, and whether it was C or earlier days Fortran or something, and now we have robotic programmers, so to speak, which is the language. So I may not need a big team. I'm actually pulling well-written code from multiple spots, and one may think, well, does that stifle creativity or does it improve creativity because I have more time to do more things? And so that's a different experience. I think from you hear all about automation in terms of chatbots, whether they're on the web. Instead of calling my friend or pinging someone like, hey, do you know what this means? There's some automation bot I can go to on the web and get my answer very quickly. And so I think in terms, when I think about the new folks coming in, the coming out of college and the new hires, I really see it as around mindset. I mean, they grew up connected. When I look at my grandkids, I have grandkids in all ages, but they all started on their mom's iPhone, when they were 2 or 3, and they knew how to navigate to the games. They knew how to play their favorite game, whatever it was, and they even knew how to go to the App Store if they wanted to find more games. Like, this is not intuitive to people who didn't, my age, or baby boomers who didn't see computers later. So they have sort of that built in that they're used to engaging with technology. They're used to avatars, right? You see this more and more, creating your own avatar. And so the new folks coming out of college, I think, are built in with those sort of skills, and they get that there's, it's a whole new world out there with robotics and automation. And perhaps some of the more challenges might be around the middle age or older workers like myself who have been around a long time, and we like that, I want to go to a meeting with Martha and Heather because, we're very social people and we're going to interact socially, and, we like coming as ourselves. And so I think there's some challenges there in learning, like this is the new skills, and that we can do it in a completely virtual world. We can't be comfortable on video. We have to learn to use, it's just not a monotonic voice sitting here just talking. We have to learn to use our whole selves when we're presenting, talking, engaging. And yeah, people may be a small box on here, but if I'm speaking directly to them, right, I can look down like, okay, I'm talking about Rick now, or, or Martha. You learn how to do that, engage, and it's not necessarily in classes. It's through the experience that you're going through as you're going through the classes, and then exercising those skills when you come into the workforce.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Rick, some thoughts from you.
Yeah, I'll try to keep it really quick. I think my first reaction is that people are now at the point, it comes down to trust. People trust Google and Wikipedia more than the other person in a conversation more typically. They're starting to, not quite Siri, but I trust Waze more for navigating in my car. So the key is finding out where people really excel beyond the sort of old school navigation talents or whatever that taxi drivers used to have. And I think as long as you compartmentalize those and decide that certain things have become commodities in terms of talent, and can be fully automated, and then you focus on people in what's different and what, that creativity, that joy and emotional intelligence is going to bring out the best in the people around them. And the term I use, thought leadership, that goes all the way back to any, when I look at any group, it's almost apparent who the thought leaders are, and those aren't usually going to be the bots. And so I'm going to keep it short since I know you have some other questions and we're short on time, but that's my thoughts on that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Alex, you have a question, and please do ask it. I think Alex's question has to do with competitiveness and the perception that for undergraduate education, workers coming from, or new hires coming from other countries may be better prepared, and what that means. But Alex, please ask your question.
Yeah, so you put it very well. So this is a gap, right? It's a gap that is translated, that comes from K-12 education in the United States. So it's a lack of math and STEM in general. That's a place where the U.S. is not a leader. And then it could be, depending on what undergraduate school you go, it could be translated to that. And the result is that, of course, workers from other countries, particularly Asia, are deemed as better prepared than U.S. students. However, my job is to make sure that we close that gap. So what is your advice, for not only for the government, but for universities? I understand that probably is the best thing is to close the gap at an earlier age, but since that is outside the realm of what I can do, so what can we do to close the gap at the university level?
Open for anyone to answer?
Yes.
Heather's like raising her hand.
Yes.
I actually want to challenge the question. Alex, I know which sounds crazy, but I think we're asking the wrong question. We're not going to prepare them at the university level. It's too late. And I think this is kind of the key piece that we really need to focus on when we think about what are we doing. We have to start in elementary school. We need to have organizations getting involved with these kids early on, with all of the children early on. And some of these programs, like I've seen different organizations have programs directly into like high schools or middle schools or elementary schools where you're starting to work with kids and get them at an age where they have these amazing ideas because there are no limits or boundaries on what they've been told they can and can't do. I had a kid that, like, literally one of my own physical children, who when she was 9 years old was like, here's how we solve the climate crisis. I'm going to send a balloon up into the upper atmosphere. And like, she had this whole crazy imagination of like things that she wanted to do to solve the climate crisis. And what's crazy is like years later, you start to see some of these technologies actually come out in the same way that a 9-year-old imagined them 11 years ago. And so I think that, yeah, there's definitely some things that we can do at university, but I think one of the biggest things we can do is have universities maybe locally start partnering with some earlier education. And like, how are you bringing kids from elementary school into the labs? Like, how are we showing them what's possible and encouraging them to like go to college, continue their education, and have those, you know, those really clear partnerships available, I think, across education.
Thank you. Heather, would others of the panelists like to comment? Michelle, I see your hand.
Yeah, I'll just make sure I'm not on mute. Yeah, I just want to highlight one program. I totally agree with Heather. We have to get earlier, right, middle school and high school. And what I have seen successful, one of the activities I've been involved in is getting girls interested in cybersecurity as a career, because that's been a career, so something I've been doing for many years. And so when we finally, what really worked was creating programs that was initially focused on girls only, right? And there's many organizations, like in my day it was Girl Scouts. You know, now Girl Scouts has a cyber badge, and then it's like Girls Who Code, Girls Inc., and Sparkle and different things. And one of the, and it can be a great success. I just want to say one thing that we did around cybersecurity was create the Girls Go Cyber Start, a whole program that was focused on middle school and high school years. We had a very short runway in terms of weeks of launching. I think in our first year we had something like 5,000 young ladies participate in middle school and high school and discovered tremendous talent. It was based on a gamification platform, but it was like where they could work and compete and actually do something with other girls rather than feeling like, well, I don't want to be the only girl on the team with the boys because that might be hard. But we did that as a girls only focus, and then we opened it up to more diverse teams because it gave them a platform to feel comfortable on their own and learning these skills. Because if we don't let the youth know that, hey, there's these exciting, like data analysis, exciting robotics, it's exciting, cybersecurity is exciting, they don't even know that possibility is going to exist. And we have to show them earlier on to get engaged in these activities that build that momentum through college.
Thank you. And they are talented. They are wonderful. They have incredible perspectives. I had the opportunity to be a coach and mentor in a girl tech trek for robotics this summer. And these are girls going into 8th grade. And I am so impressed with them. I am optimistic about the future because of them. Let me ask, just for time, if we'll come back to this question, and I think that some of our breakout sessions can address it in more detail, but let me go to Tom Holman. And Tom, please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Thank you, and a virtual hug to you, Martha, first, before I start. I have a question and a challenge. By way of background, I'm a marketing professor at Arizona State University, and I teach in our analytics master and other stuff too in the MBA program. I'm also the executive director of the Center for Services Leadership, where we have 30 member firms spanning all areas of services from Starbucks to Honeywell's, and I'm looking at both of those, so the industry side and the education side, and that's where my question is coming from. From the industry side, so we are right now doing annual calls with our members, and 23 of those 24 calls I've done so far, it can be summed up with, help, I need help. We are moving into a new normal, a new hybrid workplace of some sorts. And we have some ideas, we've tried out some stuff, but we have no guidance, right? So that's on the industry side. It's a really hot topic right now, and people are worried about, Alex, what you mentioned too. We have State Farm down here in Tempe at the waterfront, and they've got 2,000 people in their call center that have never set foot in their building. It's just how do we do this? And then from the education side, so here at ASU, we have right now we're pretty big. We have 130,000 students, about 70 of which are online degree-seeking students, bachelor's and master's. So we've got a lot of online stuff going on. But yet the feeling I'm getting is that we have really by now gone back to more or less normal plus mask. That's what I call it. It's normal plus mask. So we're in person, everything's in person. Yeah, we're all in class, great. Online, we're doing everything online, but it's online like it's 2019. So we're kind of doing online that way. Whereas in between the last 12 months, we've had a lot of stuff that was sort of hybrid, online mishmash, all kinds of things. We've kind of gone past that in some ways, weirdly. When I look back to many years ago, companies were coming and saying, we need people with team skills and presentation skills. And we responded by, okay, let's bring in all these projects and they get team skills and presentation skills. And that's been working more or less well. Now it's this, we need this new world stuff, and then what are we doing even, where are we going? And my response is, well, the companies right now don't yet know what they want or should do in this new work world. And so how can I educate for that? So that's sort of the challenge I'm facing is you don't yet know what you want. So how can I educate people for that? So yeah, we're working on that. I'm personally working on that. I'm on this call and other things too. I'm trying to figure this out. But my challenge that I want to throw into the group is we really need to, for this, cooperate on this live right now. It's a live situation. Companies are coming back, trying out all these things. Michelle, great story about what you were working on. So these things are going on
Thank
live.
you. All right.
Everybody's bringing things
Let's
live.
take this in. Thank you for sharing that. And let's take this into a question. I'll add to the question that you're raising about the relationship between educators and people who are hiring, to ask, in addition to what is needed, what have you seen has changed because of COVID-19 and education's adaptation to the way that they're providing education that is useful, that we might want to build on in the future? So how has the COVID-19 adaptation that universities have made influencing the skills that new hires do bring into the workplace? And we'll take one.
Sorry to interrupt. We only have 1 minute, so one more comment.
A quick comment from one or two panelists. What have you seen that has changed because of universities' adaptation? Maybe we'll come back to that another time. I want to thank all of the panelists. Thank you very much for conversations that you had with me, your preparation for today, your presentations, and thank all of the participants. We have a wealth of information to start with. There is no script for the future. We know that initiative and innovation are critically needed, that it's a war for creating competitive differentiation, both from the company standpoint and from the new hire standpoint. We're trying to learn how to work with both people and virtual employees in this new metaverse. Let's make some recommendations in our work groups, in our discussion groups. Thank you, Yasi. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Martha, Alex, Michelle, Rick, Nate, and Heather. Great panel. And sorry I couldn't, I have lots of questions, but I cannot be more interactive. I don't have access to full WebEx bandwidth issues on my part. So we'll go into a break, and we originally had 10 minutes for a break, but I'd like to ask everyone to come back perhaps in 5 minutes at 11:06. So thank you so much, and see you soon.
High five to all of the panelists. Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back. This is Yasi, for those of you, that's all of you who cannot see me. Gonzalo, could you please, thank you so much. If you could share the agenda. So the next item on the agenda is I'll share with you the results of an interim survey we've been taking. Gonzalo, that would be, and then after that, that's right there. Go to please go to slide number 17. Okay, thank you so much. I'll walk you very quickly through this interim set of results that we've been survey results that we've been taking, and then after that we'll go into a quick breakout session. So along with planning for these workshops, we've been doing a set of survey questions, and the idea is really to do as much data collection as we can to identify critical skill needs for STEM undergraduates. So the approach that we have taken is we're reviewing this whole project in two phases. And the first phase is taking the survey that we've started since June of this year, and then this workshop. And then the next phase is, after this workshop, we're going to see if we need to make any adjustments to the survey instruments. And then our goal is really to increase the sample size and also increase the diversity of industry sectors, because ISSIP tends to be more tech heavy. Our members are a lot from industry, tech industry. And then, we're going out to other industry sectors. So next slide, please. So far we have we've sent the survey to 61 people and 51 have responded. Our goal to have our sample size to be greater than 100. And, what you can see is we've gotten a lot of responses from high tech, from education, and then when we get to other sectors, we still need to go out and actually increase those numbers. But we're really targeting to cover a wide variety of industries. And it's important to do that because, we don't want to be biased just towards tech. Next slide, please. So one of the first things that we asked, the first question that we asked is, which of the following best describes you? Because we want to make sure that, the answers that we are getting are from experts. So you can see across the 51 people the breakout, and the majority of people who responded to our survey tend to be in high, basically senior HR roles, and also strategy roles, and also hiring managers and C-levels. There's also one category. If you look at the first three categories, you know, it's really common sense that these people qualify. We've also asked to identify whether someone is not responsible for undergraduate recruiting and they don't have significant visibility into their own organization future of talent needs, but they have visibility into the market trends. And of the 61 respondents, the 51 qualified based on our criteria, and then 10 of the responses were thrown out either because they didn't qualify or they didn't complete the survey. Next, please. The next question we asked was, please select the technical competencies in the list below that you view as most critical for your organization industry to find in STEM undergraduate new hires now and then in the next 5 years. If you look at the x-axis, the criteria by which we came up with the x-axis is number one, from our previous work, the framework that I had shared earlier on, and then from a World Economic Forum that was also shared by Martha and others. So we added the ones that are highlighted are the ones that we added based on that World Economic Forum report. And so the yellow is what you see, what industry views as critical now, and the blue is what they view in 5 years. And you know, pretty much the demand varies, but the criticality of the skills is between now and 5 years from now is very similar. And if you could go to the next slide. This is sorted by 5 years from now, and the previous one was sorted by now. And, you know, between artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, and data science, it's clearly the demand stays the same in the next 5 years. And what we see is in technology across the various domains, there is demand, but industry views it as critical, but the demand changes as different technologies emerge. Next slide, please. So top 5 technical competencies now and in the future. The data science, cloud computing, AI, and cybersecurity are actually common between now and 5 years from now. And we see IoT, AR, VR, and quantum computing actually emerging in the next 5 years. And that kind of, to me at least, is very intuitive. So data science, cloud computing, AI, cybersecurity, actually, the application is across many industries. And, you know, with IoT, AR, and VR, first high tech adopts those technologies, and then it goes into other sectors. So next slide, please. So then we asked which of these technical skills do college graduates most lack? And what we observed is those skills, the technical skills most desired by industry, are actually the ones that are most lacking by STEM graduates. And what you see on that's highlighted in light red is actually the 7 skills that are critical now and in 5 years. Next slide, please. And I just want to pause here. This is what we see at this point as an interim result, and it'll be interesting to see how that changes as we increase the number of sample size and go across other industries. Then the next question was, thinking beyond the next 5 years compared to now, which technical competencies do you believe will be in less demand or more demand? And again, across the board, our respondents either saw more demand or same. Very few actually saw less demand across the board. So that's kind of interesting to note and kind of expected because it's technologies, as technologies emerge, these demands might change, but they're not going to go away. Next slide, please. So then we went to, you know, this covered the technical skills that we had defined in our framework. Then we said, okay, let's see what is industry view today on foundational skills and also on those mindsets. So on the x-axis, we combine the foundational skills and the mindset that we had identified in our framework. And what you can see here is, again, those foundational skills that in demand will pretty much stay the same. There were a few surprises as expectedly. So, for example, ethics, our respondents saw that there will be a significant uptick in 5 years. And that's kind of expected as AI takes hold across industries. And next slide is the same view graph, but sorted in demands in 5 years. So again, in the top five skills, ethics shows up, whereas in the previous skill, ethics was 7th or 8th. Next slide, please. So then we said, okay, from these foundational skills and the mindset, what are the skills that undergraduates are most lacking? And again, with the foundational skills, we found that those that industry views the most critical are the most lacking. So, you know, there's a huge opportunity for aligning what undergraduates or new hires, recently graduate hires, can prepare for and what industry needs. Next slide, please. So then we said the same question now about foundational skills. What do you see in more demand? What do you see in less demand? And basically the same trend where the demand for these skills are not going away. Some people think they're staying the same. Some people think they're increasing. But the key point is they're not just going away. And it's really important for basically new talent prepared with these skills. And this is really the area where, you know, we viewed even in our previous work and in this work that these are foundational because they stay the same across industries, whereas where technologies change, you need new skills, and those needs change rapidly as technology changes rapidly. Next slide, please. So we asked 5 questions, which were variations of really the same question. And just to make sure that we get as much information from our respondents as possible. So we said, what areas of proficiency or skills do you feel some programs should cultivate in undergraduates now and over the 5 years? And the answer to these questions was free text. So it wasn't multiple choice. And to that question, we got 103 free text answers. And then after analyzing those, grouping those, clustering those, we identified the delta to the previous framework that we had identified. And this is what actually we came up with. So next slide, please. So here is what is in red is the delta that we discovered. And on the technology side, there is a whole lot more of critical technologies that are identified, you know, nearly 2 years later after we defined this framework. And part of this is we believe that the last time we were a lot more tech heavy than this time. And this time we went across to a diverse group of industries. And that was one reason that, you know, we got a whole lot more critical technical skills identified. Then also in the foundational skills, on the soft skills, we got 2 additional soft skills: mindfulness, storytelling. Then on the work practice skills, we got 2 additional ones: managing across cultures and working remotely. And working remotely is really what we've been hearing throughout this workshop. And this is really becoming very critical as a result of the pandemic and basically for the reason that more remote work is here to stay. Also managing across cultures was something that was critical even before, but globalization and the ability to reach more global talents when you are in a hybrid workplace also becomes more critical. And then really on the mindset, it was really interesting that of the 133 that 130 that we got, a lot of the skills that we had identified previously were re-emphasized on the skills and the mindset. And that, as we heard today, the issue of diversity and making sure that all the voices are heard and all the opportunity for future jobs is open to all undergraduates is really even more critical in a hybrid workplace than before. Next slide, please. I don't see the next slide. So key takeaways from the interim results, and we're still doing data gathering. Technical skills and what we called in our framework specialized skills, most desired by industry, are the same as the ones that are most lacking by from undergraduate new hires. The same thing in foundational skills and mindsets. And in the coming years, the need for top desired skills that we had initially defined will not go away, and skills in general that we have defined will not go away. But the relative demand may change as new technologies emerge. This is basically part of the survey. What I'm sharing here is portion of the survey results. And in the next 3 workshops, we'll share other portions of the results. That's why I encourage you to please sign up for the future events that are coming up in November and December. So that is a summary of what we have found so far. With that, I'll open it to questions if there are any questions. Okay. If there are no questions, then we will go into.
I've got a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Alex.
All right. I think one of the things that's difficult to sort of think through when seeing all that interesting data is almost like one level below what's mentioned. So, when we say that virtual reality is going to be a important area going forward, or quantum computing, for example, what does that really mean in terms of preparing students? Does that mean they have to come out of college as, VR specialists or quantum computing experts, or is it underlying capabilities that, like, does that really, can that directly inform us, or do we need to break down what are the components of someone's role who works in that area, and what do they need to be prepared to do it?
Yeah. So I'll share. I'll tell you what is my thinking on that. So, we have asked this question from 51 people, right? So to me, that's not really statistically significant. And a view of a portion of those people. So I think what that reflects is those experts see opportunities in those areas, and they're trying to hire in those areas, or they will see the need to hire for those areas, but they can't go. They are having difficulty getting talent out of universities. That's how I interpret that. I think to really say, you know, it's certainly a lot more sample, a lot more number of respondents need to check that box for this to really be evidence-based.
But my point though was,
You know, I think that's a different question than Alex was raising.
yeah,
And if I could, I'd like to respond to that.
Sorry.
Yeah, because as we have preliminary results, and this is, you know, early, we do have the opportunity to look at what we have and then to ask additional questions. And I think that these workshops are one of those opportunities. So it could be that in the breakout sessions, you know, we can address some of those issues because we certainly have the expertise and talent collected in a way that we can ask questions and gather additional insights. But I do understand your question of what is the kind of expertise, other than just the technology, that it's intended to be, how is it intended to be used, or at what level? It's a great question. We can carry it forward.
Okay.
Thank you, Martha and Alex. Any other questions? All right. So, Gonzalo, if you could go to the other slide, to the next slide. So now we are starting our breakout session, and we'll take about 15 to 20 minutes to discuss this question. What new challenges does a hybrid workplace bring, and how can undergraduate STEM education prepare new BS graduates for diverse backgrounds to have the hard and soft skills needed for building thriving and sustained careers in STEM fields in the next decade. You can take 15 minutes. When you go into your breakout sessions, there is a moderator assigned, and you know, you can discuss this amongst yourselves, and we would report back in at 11:45. Let's take about 10 minutes, or at 11:50 actually. And we'll do a quick readout, each group maybe about 1 or 2 minutes, and then we'll wrap up. So we'll be back at 11:50. So we'll have 15 minutes to discuss this. And so you'll be automatically put in your breakout sessions. If technology lets us do that. So, I'm going to let my colleagues do.
I think everybody has gone into session except for one individual who is not in session, even though he is still on.
Okay.
It's probably me. It's probably me because I'm Multitasking. It's Jim.
Oh,
That's
Jim.
No,
very interesting discussion.
Jim, I don't see you here to assign you.
I'm on the phone, so.
Oh dear, I don't see you.
It's just one of the call-in users.
Yeah, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. They'll be back in a few minutes.
Okay.
I'll just
Somehow
hang up.
oh, you are calling. Okay, let me see what you're calling. Okay, you there. Call in user 2. Oh dear. Okay, let me put you somewhere.
So who decides?
Somehow Haluk is still sitting out.
No, I'm here. Yeah, I was just gonna
No,
ask.
you're not in session.
Yeah, I'm going to session.
Okay, you've been assigned, but I still see you out here.
Okay, I was just gonna ask if you have a leader in that breakout session or not. That's why
Yes,
I was reading.
there is. Heather is going to do it.
Okay, thanks.
Okay,
I
sure.
just wanted to ask. Sure.
Yeah. Jim, I can't assign you. I somehow don't see you at all in it. Sorry.
So Joe, how many breakout sessions we ended up having?
4.
Okay. And how many people? 4 to 5. Okay, so we need
because it's constantly it's constantly changing, so I can only answer you because like suddenly session 2 has dropped to 3. Yasi is being recorded.
Oh. Okay, everyone, welcome back. Hope you had a nice breakout session. Wish it could be longer. Now I'll ask each speaker to actually give a real quick readout, and let's see if we can do this in the next, maybe 5 to 7 minutes. Please go ahead. Anyone? Heather, you want to go first? Because I see you first. That's why I'm putting you on spot.
I was muted when I came back. I started talking and then.
Oh.
Yeah,
okay,
actually, Ralph actually
I just gave my presentation.
It's all right, Lou. Ralph actually moderated for our group. Yasi.
Oh, okay. Ralph, you want to go? And then Lou, you'll go. Ralph, we can hear
Hey, this
you.
This bullet list is what our group came up with about challenges. Mostly people were worried about the challenges of collaboration, and that the tools that we have, the many tools like Zoom and WebEx and all of that, really don't cut it and don't provide adequate opportunities for getting to know people and really collaborating efficiently with people. And the landscape for STEM is getting more and more specialized, and that means that it's ever more important for especially technical people to be working with non-technical people from around the world and able to listen, able to exchange ideas. And besides the tools not being adequate, I think a lot of STEM educated people like engineers don't get enough practice doing that. It was mentioned that people are becoming less loyal to organizations. I think that's true, but I also think that the data shows that started long before the pandemic, and that loyalty to a company or an organization kind of went out the window quite a few years ago. In part because companies were no longer loyal to employees. So I think that's a permanent feature now of the employment landscape. Okay, so that's what our team came up with.
Thanks, Ralph. Lou, you want to go next?
Okay. I was going to try to make something to show also, but I'm a little behind. Our team discussed the hybrid workplace having new challenges. One of them is how to use it technically, as well as how to be effective in a hybrid workplace from a social point of view. That is, to be effective as a communicator and to be effective as a leader in a hybrid workplace. Two skills were described as being most important. One, the importance of teaming. The younger generation is skilled in social networking, but teaming is different. And the idea of a person who is experienced as a social networker through their youth, becoming an effective team member automatically is probably incorrect. So if you're part of a larger team, then you have to learn new skills in order to be able to use your social networking experience effectively. The second area was the importance of working in highly agile environments. And this came from a comment about how at Cisco they've hired a lot of people who have the agile environment mindset, which is very important in terms of their.
Lou,
yes?
One more. We need to go real quickly.
Okay, and then we got off onto talking from that point about Agile and Scrum as a technology or a technique that might be included in STEM education. So that's probably pretty much where we ended up.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Lou. And Rick, you want to go next?
Sure. Yeah, let me go ahead and quickly share. Can people see this?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So in our group, we hit on a few points. Product thinking, just as sort of as a broader, more human side of the whole technology and STEM area. Entrepreneurship came up for a few people as just a core skill set and as somewhat distinct from just business management, but actually thinking on the creative process. And then we talked about really obvious things like industry partnerships. I had mentioned applied paths earlier and team-based projects. And then one of our participants, Jen Carlin, is from this place called Iron Range Engineering, which is actually a satellite part of Minnesota State University. And people should click on this link. It's quite cool. They basically, it's a very co-op oriented. So they take basically people who've finished community college or at that level, give them a few semesters of very applied engineering education, and then they actually finish out in the field with these 2-year co-ops. But the learning is very rooted in industry partnerships. And so anyway, I know we only have a minute, so I'm just going to leave it at that.
Cool. Thank you so much, Rick. And Zami, you want to go next? Real quick.
Hello, everyone. Yes, we focused on education, and we have 2 thoughts to offer. One is in delivery of education, and that perhaps we should learn from skills being built in online distributed activities that children are already engaged in, such as multi-person video games, for example, and amplify that to education and connect it with the workplace. Our second thought had to do with maintaining a connection among learners in a virtual environment, and that we should be thoughtful about making a connection among learners by using team building and sharing experiences and connecting with each other, even in that kind of virtual environment.
Thank you so much, Zami. And last but not least, Martha, you want to go next? You're on mute, sounds like.
Thank you. I was in the same group that's already reported, one that reported first.
Okay, thanks, Martha. Has anyone not spoken? All right, wonderful. Thank you all so much. So lots of challenges, also lots of opportunities. And with that, I want to just let you know that in the next session, we'll continue the dialogue on how industry and academia can work together to address some of these challenges and enable our next generation to prepare for the opportunities. So I really encourage you to join us for the next session on November 17th. With that, I want to thank all the speakers, our wonderful moderator, Martha, and breakout session moderators, and everyone who participated. Thank you for sticking until the end. I know you're all very busy people, and we really, on behalf of the project team and myself, I want to really thank all of you. And I want to once again apologize for my technology glitch. And we'll make sure that next time we allow for more time, and also we'll address some of our own challenges on our end. So with that, I want to thank everyone and have a great day. And Martha, yes, please go. I saw you clapping, and I think that's very appropriate. Thanks, everyone. Have a good rest of the day. Thanks.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Martha. Thank you, Yasi. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, everyone, for putting this together.
Same thing. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Bye. Bye-bye. Whew.